Adaora Okeke stood in the middle of her bedroom, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her face looked calm, her makeup perfect, and her gele, the elaborate Nigerian head wrap, sat neatly on her head. To anyone looking from the outside, she was the picture of elegance, the billionaire's wife who had it all. But if you looked closely, past the expensive jewelry and designer clothes, you would see the tension in her jaw and the slight tremble in her hands. Ada wasn't nervous because she had a busy day ahead. No, this wasn't about her schedule or the endless list of appearances she had to make as Emeka Okeke's wife. It was because she had a secret, one that was eating away at her. And today, she had to keep that secret hidden while pretending to be the perfect wife. She turned away from the mirror and walked to the massive window that overlooked the estate. The view was breathtaking. Perfectly trimmed lawns, fountains, and luxury cars parked neatly in the driveway. It was the kind of wealth people dreamed of, but to Ada it felt like a cage. The walls of her life were painted with gold, but they were walls nonetheless. The sound of her daughter's laughter broke her thoughts. Amaka's voice drifted up from the garden below, where she was playing with her nanny. Ada allowed herself a small smile. Amaka was her everything, the only reason she had stayed in this nightmare of a marriage for so long. But that was going to change soon. Ada had made a decision, one she couldn't take back. "Madam, breakfast is ready," a voice said from the doorway. It was Mama Nkechi, the family cook. She was in her 60s, with a kind face and a quiet strength that Ada had always admired. Mama Nkechi had worked for the Okekes for over 30 years, and she knew everything that happened in the house. "I'll be down shortly," Ada replied, her voice steady. Mama Nkechi gave her a nod and left. Ada took a deep breath and made her way downstairs. The dining room was just as grand as the rest of the house. The long table was set with fine china, and the smell of freshly cooked food filled the air. Emeka was already seated at the head of the table, scrolling through his phone. He didn't even look up when Ada walked in. "Good morning," she said, taking her seat. Emeka grunted in response, his eyes still on his screen. Ada was used to it. Conversations with her husband were usually one-sided, and when he did talk, it was either to criticize or command. Amaka ran into the room, her face glowing with excitement. "Mommy, did you see me playing in the garden?" she asked, climbing into her chair. "I did," Ada said, her smile warming. "You were amazing, my darling." "Amaka, sit properly," Emeka snapped, finally looking up. His sharp tone made the little girl flinch. Ada's smile faded, but she said nothing. She had learned a long time ago that standing up to Emeka only made things worse. The rest of breakfast passed in silence, except for Amaka's cheerful chatter. Emeka barely ate, muttering something about a business meeting as he left the table. Once he was gone, Ada felt the tension in the room ease. After breakfast, Ada went to the kitchen. Mama Nkechi was there washing dishes. She looked up when Ada walked in, her expression softening. "You've been quiet lately," Mama Nkechi said, her voice low. "Are you okay?" Ada hesitated. She trusted Mama Nkechi, but the words she wanted to say were too dangerous to speak aloud. Instead, she said, "I'm fine. Just tired." Mama Nkechi studied her for a moment, then nodded. "If you need anything, you know you can tell me." "Thank you," Ada said. She placed a hand on Mama Nkechi's shoulder before leaving the kitchen. It was a simple gesture, but it meant a lot. Mama Nkechi had been like a second mother to her, especially in the dark moments when Ada felt like she couldn't go on. The rest of the day passed in a blur of tasks and obligations. Ada attended a charity event, smiled for the cameras, and shook hands with people she didn't care about. By the time she returned home, she was exhausted, but there was no time to rest. Emeka had reminded her that evening they would all gather at his father's estate to plan the upcoming birthday dinner for Chief Charles Okeke. As the car pulled up to the grand mansion, Ada felt her stomach twist. The Okeke family was powerful, wealthy, and ruthless. She had married into this family thinking she would find security, but all she had found was misery. Her father-in-law, Chief Charles, was the architect of the family's empire, and everyone in the family feared him. Ada had seen firsthand how he controlled his children, even as adults, and how he treated everyone else as pawns in his game. Inside the mansion, the family was already gathered in the sitting room. Emika's older brother, Ifani, was lounging on the couch, scrolling through his phone. His sister, Chinyu, was talking loudly about the guest list for the party. Chief Charles sat in his usual chair, his presence commanding even when he wasn't speaking. "You're late," Emika said as Ada walked in. His tone was sharp, and she knew better than to argue. "I had an event," Ada said simply, taking a seat beside Emika, who was playing quietly in the corner. Chief Charles glanced at her but said nothing. His silence was more intimidating than any words could have been. He turned to Emika and said, "We'll need to finalize the menu by tomorrow. I want everything to be perfect." "Yes, sir," Emika replied, his tone respectful. Ada sat quietly, listening as the family discussed the details of the party. She was only half paying attention, her mind drifting to the plan she had been working on for months. It was risky, but it was the only way to free herself and Emika from this life. As the meeting ended, Chief Charles called Ada aside. His piercing gaze made her feel like a child being scolded. "You've been quiet lately," he said, his voice low. "Is there something I should know?" Ada shook her head, forcing a smile. "No, sir. Everything is fine." Chief Charles studied her for a moment before nodding. "Good. Make sure it stays that way." Ada walked away, her heart pounding. She knew Chief Charles didn't trust her, and that made her plan even more dangerous. But she couldn't back out now. Too much was at stake. Later that night, as Ada tucked Emika into bed, the little girl looked up at her and said, "Mommy, are you happy?" The question caught Ada off guard. She hesitated, then leaned down and kissed Emika's forehead. "As long as I have you, I'm happy," she said. But as she walked out of the room, Ada knew the answer wasn't entirely true. Happiness felt like a distant dream, something she could only reach if she was brave enough to take the risk she had been planning for so long. The only question was, would she survive it? Ada woke up the next morning with a dull ache in her head. She hadn't slept well, tossing and turning all night as her thoughts wrestled with the weight of her plan. She got out of bed and walked to the window, looking out at the estate. It was quiet, peaceful even, but Ada felt no peace. Instead, her heart felt heavy, knowing what lay ahead. Downstairs, the sound of clinking dishes and faint voices drifted from the kitchen. Mama Nkechi would already be at work preparing breakfast. Ada dressed quickly and made her way down, hoping to find some solace in the familiar routine. When she entered the kitchen, Mama Nkechi looked up and smiled. "Good morning, madam." "Good morning," Ada replied, trying to sound cheerful, though her voice betrayed her unease. Mama Nkechi wiped her hands on a dish towel and gestured for Ada to sit. "You look tired," she said gently. "Are you feeling okay?" Ada hesitated. "I'm fine. Just thinking about everything that needs to be done for Chief Charles's birthday." Mama Nkechi chuckled softly. "That man and his celebrations. He acts like the world will stop if his party isn't perfect." Ada smiled faintly but said nothing. Mama Nkechi studied her for a moment, then lowered her voice. "Madam, is there something you want to tell me?" Ada's heart skipped a beat. She looked at Mama Nkechi, unsure of how to respond. Could she trust her? She had known the woman for years, but this secret was different. It was dangerous. "I don't know what you mean," Ada said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Mama Nkechi leaned closer. "You've been quiet, madam. Too quiet. And I've been here long enough to know when something isn't right." Ada looked away, her hands trembling slightly. "It's nothing," she said, but the words felt hollow. Mama Nkechi reached out and placed a hand on Ada's. "I've seen a lot in this house. More than anyone knows. If there's something you need to say, something you need help with, you can trust me." Ada looked into Mama Nkechi's eyes and saw something she hadn't expected. Understanding. For a moment, she felt the urge to spill everything, to tell her about the plan, the poison, and the years of pain that had led her to this point. But fear held her back. "Thank you, Mama Nkechi," Ada said, forcing a smile. "But I'm fine." Mama Nkechi nodded slowly, as if she didn't believe her but wasn't going to push. "All right, but remember, I'm here if you need me." The rest of the morning passed uneventfully, But Ada couldn't shake the feeling that Mom and Ketchy knew more than she let on. By the time Emeka returned home for lunch, Ada was on edge. Emeka walked into the dining room, his presence as commanding as ever. He barely glanced at Ada as he sat down, barking orders to a nearby servant. "Bring me water. Cold. Not room temperature." Ada watched him, her jaw tightening. This was the man she had married, the man who had turned her life into a nightmare. She thought of the countless times he had belittled her, the way he had stripped away her confidence piece by piece. "Are you just going to sit there staring? Or are you going to ask me about my day?" Emeka said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Ada forced a smile. "How was your day?" "Busy," he replied, his tone dismissive. "I don't know how you spend your time, but some of us actually have work to do." Ada's fists clenched under the table, but she kept her voice steady. "I was at the estate yesterday, helping with the birthday plans." "Helping," Emeka scoffed. "As if your input matters. Just stay out of the way and let the professionals handle it." Ada bit her tongue, swallowing the words she wanted to say. She had learned long ago that arguing with Emeka only gave him more ammunition to use against her. That evening, after Emeka had left for another meeting, Ada found herself sitting alone in the study. She opened a drawer and pulled out a small photo album. Inside were pictures of her family from years ago, her parents, her younger brother, and herself. The images brought a bittersweet smile to her face. Her father's laugh had always been infectious, his presence larger than life. He had been a man of principle, unafraid to speak the truth no matter the cost. Ada's smile faded as she flipped to the next page. The last photo of her father stared back at her. It had been taken just weeks before his death, before the Okekes had silenced him forever. Her mind drifted to the day she had found out the truth. It was a year after her father's death, and she had stumbled upon one of his old notebooks. Inside, he had detailed his investigation into the Okekes' illegal activities, money laundering, arms dealing, and bribery. At first, Ada hadn't wanted to believe it, but the more she read, the clearer it became. Her father hadn't died of natural causes. He had been murdered. The sound of footsteps pulled Ada from her thoughts. She quickly closed the album and turned to see Mom and Ketchy standing in the doorway. "I thought you might want some tea," Mom and Ketchy said, holding a tray. "Thank you," Ada said, her voice soft. Mom and Ketchy placed the tray on the table and sat across from her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Mom and Ketchy broke the silence. "You miss him, don't you? Your father?" Ada looked at her, surprised. "How did you?" "I remember him," Mom and Ketchy said. "He was a good man. Brave. He didn't deserve what happened to him." Ada's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean?" Mom and Ketchy hesitated, then leaned closer. "I've worked for this family for a long time, madam. I've seen things, heard things. Your father was killed because he got too close to the truth." Ada stared at her, the weight of the words sinking in. "Why didn't you tell me?" "It wasn't safe," Mom and Ketchy said. "Not for you, not for me. But I see now that you're stronger than I thought." Ada felt a lump in her throat. For years, she had carried the burden of her father's death alone, never knowing that someone else understood her pain. "What if I told you?" Ada began, her voice trembling, "that I have a plan to end this, to make sure they pay for what they've done." Mama and Ketchy's eyes widened. "You're serious?" Ada nodded. "I can't live like this anymore, and I can't let them ruin Amaka's life the way they've ruined mine." Mama and Ketchy was silent for a moment, then said, "Whatever you're planning, you don't have to do it alone." Ada looked at her, surprised. "You'd help me?" Mama and Ketchy's expression hardened. "For your father. For you. For Amaka." Yes, for the first time in years, Ada felt a glimmer of hope. She wasn't alone anymore. Together, they could bring the Okekes down. And this time, they wouldn't fail. The day of the dinner arrived faster than Ada expected. Her stomach was in knots as she stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the folds of her emerald green dress. She had picked the dress carefully, elegant enough to fit in with the Okeke family, but simple enough not to draw too much attention. Tonight wasn't about appearances. It was about survival. Amaka peeked into the room. already dressed in a white gown that made her look like a little angel. "Mommy, are we leaving soon?" "Yes, darling. Very soon," Ada said, forcing a smile. "Are you excited?" Amaka shrugged. "Not really. Uncle Afani always talks too loud. And Auntie Chinyu is always asking me boring questions." Ada chuckled despite herself. "Just be polite, okay? It's only for a little while." Amaka nodded and ran off, her curls bouncing as she went. Ada's smile faded as soon as she was alone again. Tonight, everything depended on her and Mama Nkechi. The plan was simple in theory but dangerous in reality. One mistake and everything could fall apart. By the time they arrived at Chief Charles's estate, the sun had dipped below the horizon, casting the mansion in a golden glow from the floodlights. Ada held Amaka's hand tightly as they walked through the grand entrance, where servants stood at attention, ready to greet the family. Inside, the atmosphere was as tense as ever. Afani, Emika's older brother, was sitting in the living room, scrolling through his phone. Chinyu, Emika's sister, was directing servants on where to place the centerpieces on the dining table. Chief Charles sat in his large armchair, watching everything like a hawk. "You're late," Emika said as Ada entered the room. His tone was sharp, but Ada didn't flinch. "There was traffic," she replied simply, not meeting his eyes. Emika grunted and turned back to Chief Charles. "Everything is ready, Papa. The menu is finalized, and the staff knows what to do." Chief Charles nodded approvingly. "Good. This dinner needs to be perfect. I don't want any mistakes." Ada sat quietly in a corner, pretending to focus on Amaka as the family continued their discussions. In reality, her mind was racing. Mama Nkechi had promised to handle the stew, the main dish for the night, and add the poison just before serving. Ada's job was to act normal, to keep everyone's attention away from the kitchen. When dinner was finally announced, the family moved to the long dining table. The table was set with fine china, crystal glasses, and gold-plated cutlery. Servants moved around swiftly, pouring wine and placing dishes before each guest. Chief Charles raised his glass, his voice booming. "To family," he said. "To family," everyone echoed, though Ada's voice was quieter than the rest. The first courses were served, soup, followed by salad. Ada barely touched her food, her appetite non-existent. She kept glancing toward the kitchen, waiting for Mama Nkechi to appear with the stew. Emika noticed her fidgeting and frowned. "What's wrong with you? Eat your food." "I'm fine," Ada said quickly. "Just not very hungry." Emika narrowed his eyes but didn't press further. Finally, Mama Nkechi emerged from the kitchen, carrying a large pot of steaming stew. She moved gracefully, her face calm and unreadable as she placed the pot in the center of the table. "Ah, Mama Nkechi," Chief Charles said, smiling for the first time that evening. "You always make the best stew." "Thank you, sir," Mama Nkechi said with a bow. "I hope it's to your liking." The servants began serving the stew, ladling it into bowls for each guest. Ada's heart pounded as her bowl was placed in front of her. This was it. There was no turning back now. As the family began eating, Ada's eyes darted around the table, watching for the first sign that the poison was taking effect. Chinyu was the first to speak. "This is delicious, Mama Nkechi," she said, her tone unusually warm. "You've outdone yourself." Mama Nkechi nodded politely. "Thank you, madam." Ada forced herself to take a small bite, just enough to avoid suspicion. The stew tasted rich and flavorful, masking the deadly ingredient hidden within. She set her spoon down, her hands trembling under the table. "Amaka, eat your food," Emika said sharply, noticing their daughter playing with her spoon. "I'm not hungry, Daddy," Amaka said, her voice small. "Don't argue with me," Emika snapped. "It's okay," Ada said quickly, trying to defuse the tension. "She can eat later." Emika shot her a warning look but said nothing. The room fell silent again, save for the sound of spoons clinking against bowls. Then it happened. Chinyu suddenly froze, her spoon slipping from her hand and clattering onto her plate. Her face turned pale, and she clutched her stomach, groaning in pain. "What's wrong?" Chief Charles demanded, his voice sharp. Chinyu tried to speak, but no words came out. She slumped forward, her head hitting the table. Panic erupted as Ifani stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "What's going on?" he shouted. Before anyone could respond, Ifani doubled over, coughing violently. He stumbled back, knocking over his chair as he collapsed onto the floor. "Papa!" Emeka shouted, turning to Chief Charles, who was clutching his chest, his face contorted in pain. Ada sat frozen, her heart racing as chaos unfolded around her. Emeka turned to her, his eyes wild with fury. "What did you do?" I didn't," Ada stammered, but her words were drowned out by Chief Charles's pained groans. Mama Nkechi stood by the doorway, her face calm despite the pandemonium. Ada caught her eye, and in that moment, she realized that everything was going according to plan. But it wasn't over yet. "Help me!" Emeka shouted, shaking Chinyu's lifeless body. "Someone call an ambulance!" Ada felt a wave of nausea as she watched her husband desperately trying to revive his sister. For a brief moment, she questioned everything. Was this really the right thing to do? But then she remembered her father, remembered the years of abuse and control. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about freedom. As Emeka turned back to her, his face twisted with anger, Ada braced herself. The worst was yet to come. The room erupted into chaos. Ifani writhed on the floor, coughing violently, while Chinyu lay slumped over the table, motionless. Chief Charles, clutching his chest, gasped for air as his face turned an alarming shade of gray. The once lively dining room now resembled a battlefield, and the noise was deafening. Furniture scraping, people shouting, and heavy breathing filling the air. "Call someone! Call an ambulance!" Emeka roared, his voice booming as he shot to his feet. He turned to Ada, his face contorted with rage. "What did you do? What is this?" Ada froze, her heart pounding so loudly she thought it might burst out of her chest. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her mind raced as she tried to find something, anything to say. Emeka's sharp glare bore into her like a knife. "Answer me," he bellowed, slamming his fist on the table, causing the bowls to rattle. "I don't know," Ada cried, her voice trembling. "I didn't do anything, Emeka. I don't know what's happening." "You're lying," Emeka growled, stepping closer to her, his towering frame casting a shadow over her. "You've been acting strange for weeks. Don't think I haven't noticed." "Papa," Ifani's weak voice interrupted the moment. Emeka spun around to see his brother reaching for Chief Charles, who was now slumped in his chair, barely moving. "Papa, hold on," Emeka shouted, running to his father's side. He shook the old man's shoulder, but Chief Charles didn't respond. His breathing was shallow, his eyes fluttering shut. Mama Nkechi stood quietly in the corner, her hands folded in front of her. She didn't flinch, didn't move, as though she had been expecting this. Ada's eyes flickered to her, silently pleading for some sort of guidance. But Mama Nkechi gave no signal, no reassurance. "Why are you just standing there?" Emeka barked at Mama Nkechi, his voice desperate. "Get water. Do something." Mama Nkechi bowed her head slightly. "I will, sir," she said calmly, her voice steady, before disappearing into the kitchen. Emeka paced the room, his hands gripping his head. What is happening? What is this madness? His gaze landed back on Ada, narrowing into a deadly glare. "This has something to do with you. I know it." "It doesn't," Ada cried, her voice cracking. "I swear, Emeka, I don't know what's going on." "You're lying," he snarled, stepping toward her again. His tone was lower now, more menacing. "You've always been weak, Ada. Useless. But I never thought you'd stoop this low." "Stop it, Daddy." Amaka's small voice cut through the noise. She had been sitting quietly in her chair, clutching her doll tightly to her chest. Tears streamed down her face as she looked at her parents, her big brown eyes filled with fear. "Stop shouting at Mommy." Emeka froze, his fists clenched. For a brief moment, the anger in his face softened, but it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. "Go to your room, Amaka," he said firmly. "No," Amaka shouted, her voice shaking but defiant. "You're being mean. Leave mommy alone. Amaka, listen to your father, Ada said gently, though her voice trembled. She couldn't let her daughter see what might come next. Go upstairs, darling. Please. Amaka hesitated, her lip quivering. Then she nodded, clutching her doll tighter as she ran out of the room. Her footsteps echoed faintly as she climbed the stairs, leaving Ada alone with Emeka. Mama Nkechi returned with a glass of water and placed it in front of Chief Charles. Sir, try to drink this, she said softly, though the old man didn't move. His breathing was barely audible now, and his head lolled to one side. It's too late, Ifani whispered, his voice weak as he struggled to sit up. Papa, no, Emeka shouted, slamming his hand on the table again. He's not gone. He can't be gone. Ada watched the scene unfold, her mind spinning. She knew this was part of the plan, but seeing it happen in real time felt surreal. Her heart ached as she looked at Amaka's empty seat, wondering if her daughter had sensed the danger she was in. Emeka turned back to her, his eyes blazing. This is your fault, he spat. You brought this into our home. I know you did. I didn't. Ada cried, tears streaming down her face. I would never. Enough, Emeka shouted, cutting her off. He grabbed her wrist, his grip like iron. You're going to tell me the truth, Ada. Now. There's nothing to tell, she sobbed, struggling against his hold. Please, Emeka. Let me go. Before Emeka could respond, a loud crash echoed from the kitchen. Both of them froze, their heads snapping toward the sound. It was followed by the sound of shattering glass and a low groan. What now? Emeka growled, releasing Ada's wrist and storming toward the kitchen. Ada rubbed her sore wrist, her eyes darting to Mama Nkechi, who was now standing still, her face unreadable. Stay here, Emeka ordered, pointing at Ada before disappearing into the kitchen. As soon as he was gone, Mama Nkechi stepped closer to Ada, lowering her voice. This is our chance, she said quickly. When he comes back, keep him distracted. I'll handle the rest. Ada's eyes widened. What do you mean? What's happening? There's no time to explain, Mama Nkechi said firmly. Just trust me. Ada nodded slowly, her heart pounding as she tried to steady her breathing. She didn't know what Mama Nkechi had planned, but at this point, she had no choice but to follow her lead. Emeka stormed back into the dining room, his face red with anger. The kitchen is a mess, he barked. This night is cursed. He turned to Ada, pointing a finger at her. You're going to explain everything, or I swear. Before he could finish, Mama Nkechi stepped forward. Sir, perhaps you should sit down, she said calmly. You've been under a lot of stress. Don't tell me what to do. Emeka snapped, but he did as she suggested, sinking into a chair and burying his face in his hands. Ada watched him carefully, her mind racing. She had to keep him distracted, just as Mama Nkechi had said. Emeka, she said softly, maybe we should call a doctor. And tell them what? Emeka growled, looking up at her. That my father and siblings collapsed out of nowhere? Do you want the whole world to know what's happening in this house? It's not about that, Ada said gently. It's about saving them. They're already gone, Emeka said bitterly, his voice breaking slightly. They're gone, and it's your fault. Ada flinched at his words but didn't respond. She glanced at Mama Nkechi, who gave her a small nod, as if to say, keep going. Maybe this is a sign, Ada said cautiously. A sign that things need to change. Emeka looked at her, his expression unreadable. What are you talking about? Us, Ada said, her voice trembling. This family. Everything. Maybe it's time to start over. Emeka's eyes narrowed. What are you saying, Ada? Are you blaming me for this? No, Ada said quickly. I'm just saying. Before she could finish, Emeka's body stiffened. His face contorted with pain, and he clutched his stomach, groaning loudly. Emeka! Ada shouted, rushing to his side. But deep down, she knew this was part of the plan. The poison was finally taking effect. Emeka collapsed to the floor, his groans echoing in the vast dining room. Ada dropped to her knees beside him, her heart pounding. She wanted to feel relieved. This was part of the plan. wasn't it? But seeing him like this filled her with a mix of fear and confusion. Emeka! Emeka! She called out, shaking his shoulder. His eyes were wild, darting around the room as sweat poured down his face. Ada, he gasped, his voice hoarse. What have you done? I didn't do anything. Ada cried, though her voice cracked under the weight of her lie. From the corner of her eye, she saw Mama Nkechi step closer, her calm demeanor unchanged. Madam, let him be, she said softly. He will not listen to reason now. Ada looked up at her, panic written all over her face. What do we do? He's going to die like the others. Mama Nkechi's gaze didn't waver. It's already done, madam. What's left now is for us to secure ourselves. What are you talking about? Ada whispered, her voice trembling. I didn't want Amaka to see this. She's upstairs. She's going to hear everything. Mama Nkechi's eyes softened. Amaka is stronger than you think. You did this for her, remember that? Emeka let out a guttural moan, clutching his stomach. He glared at Ada, his lips trembling. You'll pay for this, he spat, his voice barely audible. Ada shook her head violently. I didn't do anything, Emeka. Why would I hurt my own family? You've hated us? Hated me. From the beginning, Emeka hissed, his breaths growing shorter. You weak, useless woman. Ada's hands trembled. She couldn't meet his eyes anymore. Instead, she looked at Mama Nkechi. This wasn't supposed to be like this. This wasn't supposed to feel this way. Mama Nkechi crouched beside her, placing a firm hand on her shoulder. You did what needed to be done, madam. Don't let his words shake you. I never hated him, Ada whispered, her voice breaking. I hated what he became. I hated what they turned me into. Emeka groaned again, louder this time. He tried to reach for the table, but his hand faltered, hitting the floor with a dull thud. You'll regret this, he mumbled before his body slumped, motionless. Ada stared at him, her breath caught in her throat. Was he? She didn't dare finish the thought. He's gone, Mama Nkechi said simply, standing up. Ada felt tears streaming down her face. What have I done? Before Ada could spiral further, the faint sound of footsteps startled her. She turned toward the doorway just as Amaka appeared, clutching her doll tightly to her chest. Her wide, innocent eyes locked onto the scene before her. Her father lying still on the floor, her mother kneeling beside him, and Mama Nkechi standing over them both. Mommy? Amaka's small voice quivered, filled with fear and confusion. What happened to Daddy? Ada froze, unsure of what to say. Her mind raced, trying to come up with something that would make sense to a 10-year-old. But what could she say? The truth was too horrifying. Amaka, darling, Ada started, her voice shaky. Daddy isn't feeling well. Amaka's brows furrowed, and she clutched her doll tighter. Why is he on the floor? Why is everyone else so quiet? Mama Nkechi stepped forward, her tone gentle but firm. Amaka, your mommy is trying to help Daddy. Why don't you go upstairs and wait in your room? Everything will be okay. Amaka's eyes darted between her mother and the still figure of her father. Is he going to wake up? Ada's chest tightened. She couldn't lie to her daughter, but she also couldn't tell her the full truth. Go upstairs, my love, she said softly. I'll explain everything later, I promise. Amaka hesitated, her little face etched with worry. Okay, Mommy, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. She turned and walked away, her footsteps slow and reluctant. Ada let out a shaky breath, tears threatening to spill again. She's going to hate me. No, Mama Nkechi said firmly. She'll understand one day. When she's older, she'll see that you did this for her. Ada shook her head, her hands trembling. What kind of mother does this? What kind of mother poisons her child's family? The kind of mother who loves her child enough to save her. Mama Nkechi replied, her tone unwavering. This family was poisoned long before tonight, madam. You just gave them a taste of their own medicine. The sound of sirens in the distance broke the silence. Ada's head snapped up, her eyes widening. The police? Who called them? Mom and Ketchy's expression didn't change. I did. Ada's jaw dropped. Why would you do that? We're not ready. They'll arrest us. They won't. Mom and Ketchy interrupted, her voice calm but firm. I've been planning this for years, madam. I know how to make it look like an accident. What do you mean you've been planning this? Ada asked, her voice rising in panic. Mom and Ketchy's eyes softened. Your father was a good man, madam. He didn't deserve what happened to him. When they killed him, I vowed to bring this family down. But I couldn't do it alone. I needed you. Ada stared at her, disbelief written all over her face. You used me? No, Mom and Ketchy said firmly. I stood by you, waited for the right moment, and when you were ready, I supported you. This was always your fight, madam. I just helped you win it. Ada felt a wave of nausea wash over her. Everything felt too much. The truth, the lies, the blood on her hands. She wanted to run, to escape, but there was nowhere to go. The sirens grew louder, and red and blue lights flashed through the windows. Ada's heart raced as she turned to Mom and Ketchy. What do we do now? Mom and Ketchy placed a hand on her shoulder. Trust me, madam. I'll handle this. Before Ada could respond, the front door burst open, and several police officers stormed in. Police! Everyone stay where you are. Ada raised her hands instinctively, her eyes wide with fear. One of the officers approached her, his expression stern. Are you Adaora Okeke? Yes, she whispered, her voice barely audible. We received a call about an emergency here, the officer said, his tone sharp. What happened? Ada's mouth opened, but no words came out. Her mind was blank, her body frozen in place. She didn't do anything, Mom and Ketchy said, stepping forward. I called you. It was the food. Something must have been wrong with the stew. The officer frowned. And who are you? I'm the family cook, Mom and Ketchy replied calmly. I prepared the meal, but I don't know how this happened. I swear. Ada stared at Mom and Ketchy, her heart sinking. She realized in that moment what the older woman was doing. She was taking the blame. Madam, is this true? The officer asked, turning to Ada. Ada hesitated, her mind racing. She wanted to scream, to tell them the truth. But Mom and Ketchy gave her a subtle shake of the head, warning her to stay silent. Yes, Ada said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. She cooked the food. The officer nodded and turned back to Mom and Ketchy. You're coming with us for questioning. Mom and Ketchy nodded, her expression calm. She looked at Ada one last time, her eyes filled with something Ada couldn't quite place. Pride, perhaps, or maybe relief. As the officers led Mom and Ketchy away, Ada felt a hollow ache in her chest. She had wanted freedom, but not like this. Not at the cost of someone who had been like family to her. She stood alone in the dining room, the weight of everything pressing down on her. The house was eerily quiet now, the chaos replaced by a suffocating silence. Ada looked up the stairs, where she knew Amaka was waiting. She straightened her back, wiped her tears, and took a deep breath. For her daughter's sake, she had to keep going. This wasn't the end, just the beginning of a new chapter, one she hoped would be better than the last. Ada sat on the edge of her bed, her hands trembling as she stared at the small, weathered folder Mom and Ketchy had handed her before the police took her away. It was light, almost weightless, but Ada knew it contained heavy truths. She hadn't opened it yet. She wasn't sure if she had the strength to face what lay inside. From upstairs, she heard Amaka humming softly, her voice carrying faintly through the quiet house. It was a comforting sound, a reminder of why Ada had done what she did. Everything, every decision, every risk had been for her daughter. Still, the weight of it all pressed heavily on her chest. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Ada jumped slightly, her pulse quickening. She wasn't expecting anyone. Taking a deep breath, she stood and walked to the door, cracking it open cautiously. Standing there was a man in a plain suit, his expression calm but unreadable. He held up a badge. Good evening, Mrs. Okeke. I'm Detective Alyamide. May I come in? Ada's heart raced, but she nodded, stepping aside to let him in. What's this about? She asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Alyamide walked in, his sharp eyes scanning the room. "We've been investigating the events at your father-in-law's estate. I have a few questions for you." They sat in the living room, the tension thick in the air. Ada clasped her hands tightly in her lap, trying to appear calm. Alyamide pulled out a small notebook and clicked his pen. His movements were deliberate, his gaze never leaving her. "Mrs. Okeke," he began, his tone measured, "we've received the preliminary autopsy reports for your husband, his siblings, and Chief Charles. It appears they were poisoned. The question is, how?" Ada's stomach churned, but she kept her face blank. "I don't know," she said softly. "I wasn't in the kitchen when the food was prepared. Your cook, Mom Nkechi, claims full responsibility," Alyamide said, watching her closely. "She says it was an accident, that something must have been wrong with the ingredients." Ada nodded, her heart pounding. "Mom Nkechi has worked for the family for years. She would never intentionally hurt anyone." Alyamide raised an eyebrow. "Would she? Or perhaps she was trying to protect someone." Ada's breath caught. "Protect someone? I don't understand." Alyamide leaned forward slightly, his gaze piercing. "You've lived in that household for years, Mrs. Okeke. Surely you've seen things, heard things. Did anyone have a reason to harm the Okeke family?" Ada hesitated, her mind racing. She knew the answer. She had every reason to harm them, but admitting that wasn't an option. "I can't think of anyone," she said finally, her voice steady. "The family. They had their disagreements, like any family, but nothing serious." Alyamide studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right. If you remember anything at all, you can reach me here." He handed her a card and stood to leave. Ada walked him to the door, her palms clammy. "Thank you, Detective," she said as he stepped outside. He paused, turning back to her. "One last thing, Mrs. Okeke. People don't just die by accident in households like yours. I'll be in touch." As soon as he was gone, Ada locked the door and leaned against it, her chest rising and falling rapidly. She felt like she was suffocating, the walls of the house closing in around her. She needed answers. She needed to open that folder. Back in her bedroom, she sat on the bed and stared at the folder for a long time before finally mustering the courage to open it. Inside were old photographs, documents, and handwritten notes. She recognized some of the faces immediately, Chief Charles, Emeka, and even herself in a photo taken on her wedding day. But it was the unfamiliar faces that caught her attention. One photo showed a group of young men standing in front of a warehouse. Beneath it was a note written in neat, precise handwriting. Okeke Arms Deal 2003. Another photo showed Chief Charles shaking hands with a government official, a sly smile on his face. The caption read, "Bribe to Minister of Defense, 2010. Ada's hands shook as she flipped through the papers. There were receipts, signed agreements, and even bank statements, all evidence of the Okeke family's illegal dealings. And then she found it, a letter from her father. The letter was addressed to her, though she had never seen it before. The paper was yellowed with age, the ink slightly smudged. Ada's eyes scanned the words, her breath catching as she read. "My dearest Adaora, if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it. I've uncovered things about the Okeke family, things they would kill to keep hidden. They're dangerous, Ada. I know you married into that family thinking it would bring stability, but they're not who they appear to be. Protect yourself. Protect your children. And if you ever find the strength, expose them for who they really are. All my love, always, Papa." Ada's tears fell freely now, staining the old paper. Her father had known. He had tried to warn her, even from beyond the grave. She clutched the letter to her chest, sobbing quietly. For years, she had felt alone, trapped, and powerless. But now, with this folder, she had the tools to finally fight back. The next morning, Ada sat at the dining table with the folder spread out before her. Amaka was eating cereal quietly, watching her mother curiously. "Mommy, what are you doing?" she asked, her voice sweet and innocent. "Just looking at some papers." "Darling," Ada said, forcing a smile. "How's your cereal?" "Good," Amaka said, though she didn't look convinced. "You're sad." I can tell. Ada's smile faltered. I'm okay, my love. Don't worry about me. Amaka put down her spoon and tilted her head. Is this about Daddy? Ada's chest tightened. She didn't know how to answer. Yes, she said softly. It's about Daddy. Are we going to be okay? Amaka asked, her big brown eyes filled with worry. Ada reached across the table and took her daughter's hand. We're going to be fine, she said firmly. I promise. Later that day, Ada made a decision. She gathered the documents and photos, carefully placing them back into the folder. She couldn't keep this to herself anymore. If she wanted to protect Amaka, she needed to take action. Her first stop was Mom Nkechi. She visited the older woman at the police station, her heart heavy with guilt. When she saw Mom Nkechi behind the glass, Ada's eyes filled with tears. Mom Nkechi, she whispered, her voice trembling. I'm so sorry. The older woman smiled gently. Don't be, madam. I told you I would do whatever it took to protect you and Amaka. They're going to blame you for everything, Ada said, her voice cracking. I can't let that happen. Mom Nkechi leaned forward, her expression serious. Listen to me, madam. This is bigger than you or me. You have the evidence now. Use it. Take it to someone who can expose the truth. Ada nodded, her resolve strengthening. I will. And madam, Mom Nkechi added, her voice softening. Don't forget why you're doing this. For Amaka. Ada left the police station with a new sense of purpose. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. Ada sat on her bed, staring at the folder in her lap. The house was eerily quiet except for the faint sound of the ceiling fan humming above. Her heart pounded as she replayed Mom Nkechi's words in her mind. You have the evidence now. Use it. Take it to someone who can expose the truth. She had the power to destroy the Okeke family's legacy in her hands, but the risk was immense. What if it backfired? What if they came after her and Amaka? But as she glanced at the letter from her father, tucked inside the folder, her resolve hardened. She couldn't let fear paralyze her anymore. For Amaka's future, she had to act. The next morning, Ada called her lawyer, Mr. Adebayo, a man she trusted deeply. His voice on the other end of the line was calm, but there was a hint of concern as she explained her situation. You're saying you have proof of their crimes? Mr. Adebayo asked. Yes, Ada replied, gripping the phone tightly. Documents, photos, letters. It's all here. There was a pause before Mr. Adebayo spoke again. This is dangerous, Ada. You know the kind of people they are. I know, Ada said, her voice trembling but determined. But I can't stay silent anymore. I have to protect my daughter. All right, Mr. Adebayo said. Bring everything to my office. We'll figure out the safest way to handle this. Ada nodded, though he couldn't see her. Thank you. Be careful, he added before the call ended. Ada packed the folder into a small bag and went upstairs to check on Amaka. The little girl was sitting on her bed, drawing with colored pencils. She looked up as her mother entered the room. Mommy, are we going somewhere? Amaka asked, her tone curious. Yes, my love, Ada said, sitting beside her. We're going on a little trip. Just you and me. Where? Amaka's eyes lit up with excitement. To somewhere safe, Ada replied, brushing a curl away from her daughter's face. But we have to leave quickly, okay? Amaka nodded, her trust in her mother unwavering. Okay, Mommy. As they drove through the crowded streets of Lagos, Ada couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every car that lingered too long behind hers made her palms sweat. She tightened her grip on the steering wheel, her eyes darting to the rearview mirror every few seconds. Mommy, why are you driving so fast? Amaka asked, her small voice breaking the tense silence. We just need to get to where we're going quickly, Ada said, forcing a smile. Don't worry, darling. Everything's fine. But everything wasn't fine. Ada's instincts told her they were in danger. She made a sudden turn down a side street, hoping to lose anyone who might be following them. When they finally arrived at Mr. Adebayo's office, Ada felt a wave of relief. The building was tall and nondescript, blending in with the other offices around it. She parked the car and took Amaka's hand, clutching the bag with the folder tightly. Inside, Mr. Adebayo greeted them with a warm but serious expression. He was a tall man with kind eyes and a calm demeanor that immediately put Ada at ease. "You made it," he said, leading them into his office. "Let's see what you've got." Ada handed him the folder, her hands trembling slightly. Mr. Adebayo opened it and began examining the contents, his expression growing more serious with each page he read. "This is damning," he said after a while, looking up at Ada. "If we release this, it will destroy the Okeke family completely." "That's what I want," Ada said firmly. "They've hurt too many people. They need to be stopped." Mr. Adebayo nodded. "We'll need to be strategic about this. If we go to the police, there's a chance they'll cover it up. The Okekes still have allies in high places. What do we do then?" Ada asked, her voice tight with worry. "We go to the press," Mr. Adebayo said. "A reputable journalist who won't back down, no matter the pressure. Once this goes public, there's no way to bury it." Ada nodded, her resolve strengthening. "Let's do it." As Mr. Adebayo made calls to arrange a meeting with a trusted journalist, Ada sat with Amaka in a corner of the office. The little girl was unusually quiet, her big eyes watching her mother closely. "Mommy, is something bad happening?" Amaka asked softly. Ada pulled her daughter onto her lap, holding her close. "It's okay, my love. Mommy is just making sure we're safe." Amaka nodded, resting her head on Ada's chest. "I'm glad we're together." "Me too," Ada whispered, kissing the top of her daughter's head. Later that evening, Ada and Amaka were escorted to a safe house arranged by Mr. Adebayo. It was a small, modest apartment tucked away in a quiet part of town. Ada felt a mix of relief and anxiety as she looked around. This was a temporary refuge, but the danger wasn't over. As she tucked Amaka into bed that night, the little girl looked up at her with sleepy eyes. "Will Daddy come here too?" Ada froze, her heart aching at the question. She forced a smile and stroked Amaka's hair. "No, my love. It's just us for now." "Okay," Amaka murmured, her eyes closing as she drifted off to sleep. Ada sat by her daughter's side for a long time, watching her breathe peacefully. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, but for Amaka's sake, she would face whatever came next. This wasn't just about exposing the Okekes. It was about building a future where her daughter could grow up free from fear. The following day, Mr. Adebayo called with good news. The journalist, a respected investigative reporter named Funmi Adebayo, had agreed to meet. Ada's heart raced as she prepared for the meeting. This was it, the moment she would finally take control of her story. As she left the safe house, folder in hand, Ada felt a renewed sense of purpose. She wasn't just running anymore. She was fighting back. For herself, for her father, and most importantly, for Amaka. The sun peeked through the thin curtains of the safe house, casting a golden glow across the small room. Ada stood by the window, clutching a cup of tea. Her fingers trembled slightly, though the tea was no longer hot. She hadn't slept much, her mind running through every possible outcome of today's meeting. Amaka was still asleep, her small figure curled up under the covers on the bed. Ada watched her daughter for a moment, a pang of guilt piercing her heart. Everything she had done was for Amaka, but had she gone too far? Had she taken the right risks? The sharp buzz of her phone broke the silence. Ada nearly dropped her cup as she grabbed the phone from the table. It was Mr. Adebayo. "They're ready for you," he said. "The journalist will meet us at her office in an hour." "Okay," Ada replied, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. "We'll be there." An hour later, Ada and Amaka sat in the back seat of a car Mr. Adebayo had arranged. The streets of Lagos were busy as always, filled with the sounds of honking horns and vendors shouting about their wares. Ada kept glancing at the folder in her lap, gripping it tightly. Inside was the truth, the key to everything, but it also felt like a ticking time bomb. "Mommy, where are we going?" Amaka asked, her voice breaking through Ada's thoughts. "To meet someone very important," Ada said, smiling softly. "They're going to help us." Amaka nodded, though she didn't fully understand. "Will we come back here after?" Ada hesitated. "Maybe, my love. But no matter what happens, we'll be okay. Amaka seemed satisfied with the answer and turned to look out the window, humming quietly to herself. Ada's chest tightened. She hoped she was telling the truth. The car pulled up to a modest office building in a quieter part of the city. Mr. Adebayo was waiting for them at the entrance, his expression calm but serious. He greeted Ada with a nod and bent down to smile at Amaka. "Hello, young lady," he said warmly. "Are you ready to help your mommy today?" Amaka smiled shyly and nodded, holding tightly to Ada's hand. Together, they followed Mr. Adebayo into the building and up a flight of stairs. At the end of a narrow hallway was a door with a small nameplate, Funmi Adebayo, investigative journalist. Mr. Adebayo knocked twice, and a confident voice called out from inside. "Come in." Funmi Adebayo was a tall, poised woman in her late 40s, with short, neatly styled hair and sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She stood as they entered, extending a hand to Ada. "Mrs. Okeke," she said, her tone firm but kind. "I'm glad you came." Ada shook her hand, her grip firm despite the butterflies in her stomach. "Thank you for meeting us." Funmi gestured for them to sit, her gaze briefly flicking to Amaka. "You've brought your daughter. That's brave." Ada smiled faintly. "She's my reason for all of this." Funmi nodded, her expression softening slightly. "I understand. Let's get started." The room was quiet except for the rustle of papers and the occasional scribble of Funmi's pen as Ada laid everything out. She explained how she had found the documents, how her father had tried to expose the Okekes, and how his death had been orchestrated to silence him. As she spoke, her voice shook at times, but she didn't stop. Funmi listened intently, occasionally asking a question or clarifying a detail. Mr. Adebayo sat beside her, occasionally offering support or advice. When Ada finally finished, Funmi leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. "This is damning evidence," she said finally. "If we publish this, it will destroy what's left of the Okeke Empire. But you know what that means, don't you?" Ada nodded slowly. "It means they'll come after me." "Yes," Funmi said bluntly. "Their allies, their partners, anyone who has something to lose. They'll want to silence you." "I don't care," Ada said, her voice firm. "They've already taken so much from me. I won't let them take anything else." Funmi studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, I'll do it. But I'll need time to verify everything. Once it's out, there's no going back." "I understand," Ada said. "Just promise me you'll protect my daughter. If something happens to me—" "Nothing will happen to you," Mr. Adebayo interrupted firmly. "We'll make sure of it." For the next 2 days, Ada stayed at the safe house with Amaka, waiting anxiously for the story to break. Every noise outside made her jump. Every knock at the door sent her heart racing. But through it all, she stayed strong for Amaka, who remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around them. Finally, on the 3rd day, Mr. Adebayo called. His voice was steady, but Ada could hear the urgency beneath it. "It's out," he said. "Funmi published the story this morning. It's everywhere." Ada felt a mix of relief and terror wash over her. "What happens now?" "Now," Mr. Adebayo said, "we wait." The fallout was immediate. By midday, news outlets across the country were reporting on the Okeke family's crimes. Headlines screamed of corruption, bribery, and murder. The evidence Ada had provided was plastered across television screens and websites, leaving no room for doubt. Ada watched the coverage from the safe house, her hands trembling as she held the remote. Funmi appeared on the screen, her voice steady as she explained the story. "The Okeke family has long been a pillar of wealth and power in Nigeria," she said. "But behind the facade lies a history of crime and corruption. Thanks to a brave whistleblower, the truth has finally come to light." Ada turned off the TV, her chest tight. It was done. The world knew. But the danger was far from over. Later that evening, as she tucked Amaka into bed, the little girl looked up at her with wide, curious eyes. "Mommy, are we going to stay here forever?" Ada stroked her daughter's hair, her heart aching. "No, my love, just a little longer. Then we'll find a new place, a better place. Will we be happy there?" Amaka asked. Ada smiled, though tears pricked her eyes. Yes, darling. We'll be happy. Amaka nodded, her eyes closing as she drifted off to sleep. Ada sat by her side for a long time, watching her breathe. For the first time in years, she felt a glimmer of hope. The fight wasn't over, but she had taken the first step. And no matter what came next, she would face it head on. For Amaka, for her father, and for herself.